Hi, and welcome to Life Science Solutions, a Kymanox podcast. This is the second segment of my interview with Dave Ousterout, co-founder and general partner at CapeFear Biocapital, a pre-seed fund focused exclusively on North Carolina life science companies. Before we dive in, make sure to check out the first segment in the link above. In this episode, we'll dig into how investors evaluate opportunities and the specific criteria CapeFear uses when deciding where to place their capital. Let's dive in. We're at CED's Venture Connect, where there's going to be a tremendous amount of startup companies that are going to be pitching. There's already great energy, and we're here. Folks are only on their first cup of coffee. Maybe you and I didn't sleep as much last night. We're on our second ones already. But, there's a lot of energy. But how do you guys evaluate a potential therapeutic platform or asset when it's at such an early stage, right? What's your process? You don't have to reveal too many of your secrets. But how do you accomplish that, right? I mean, because that seems pretty difficult.
Yeah, it is. Maybe starting from the top, right? I think as a new fund, we're figuring it out. Meaning, we have to understand what's happening in this market, what people are doing, and what themes are happening. So to that example, we see often, a rigorous development plan is almost, I got to do my science first. Mm-hmm. Yes, you have to do your science first, but you're not venture ready then, and that's okay. Let's talk. Let's help you understand what that is.
Yeah.
So I think it starts in learning little vignettes down here of how it's working today, which sounds surprising from, myself, Ed Field and Jimmy Melton all started this. We're all operators. We've all been all over Duke, UNC, and State. You'd think we would know that ahead of the time, but it's very different when you start carrying a check, the people you talk to and what they are envisioning it gets used for. Mm-hmm. And so part of that led to us saying, you got to be 3 years from the clinic, which is a bit wishy-washy and a bit intentional in that, because what we're looking for is there's a thematic focus recognizing we're only as good as the drugs we develop.
Yep.
So great science has to go to patients as medicine.
Yeah.
And what we don't want to do is exclude platforms where someone's saying, well, I don't really know what my lead indication is. Great, come work with us. We want to spend that first year, that critical year, helping you figure out where your platform is uniquely suited and develop the proof of concept that puts you within that 2-year window to get to the clinic.
Where does it make the most sense and have commercial viability?
It's so many things there, right? Like we'll get into that too. And then on the asset side, I think a lot of folks are hesitant on the venture side, rightfully, to fund things like toxicology studies because, usually you can get something non-dilutive. I think we look at ourselves as an accelerant for that.
Yeah.
And we need to do that at scale. But I think that's what will, by injecting capital into this ecosystem, which is very SBIR dependent, I'll say.
Yep.
Maybe we can accelerate that pace of innovation and also show innovators where dilutive capital really can help. Meaning it does start a clock. Everyone knows that. Yeah. But it's fast capital.
Exactly. Right. So it's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations over maybe the last 2 or 3 months where folks have either alluded to or some have more outright said, right, that this reality that whenever you're in the non-dilutive space, it can kind of incentivize you to, well, here's some funding and then here's something to do and here's a timeline. And again, to your point, it's not a timeline that is as aggressive as it could be, right? And so I think that's an interesting position to take. And I think it's, pretty poignant advice for startup founders to listen to, right? Because while it starts a clock, right, the moment that you take dilutive funding, right, you are always under a different clock from, presumably you're not talking to the public unless you have patents that are at minimum pending and hopefully further along, right? So you already have a clock. It just feels like such a long one that you're not thinking about it. But if by the time you actually get through clinic, you only have 2 years of patent, now you're going to have to do something kind of creative from a patent extension perspective and do some more innovation. And there are different opinions about, how much should we be doing things like that.
If you can help it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a good point. What weighs in from your lens in terms of an assets and I think it's always a combination of an asset and a team, right? But the likelihood to be able to get to clinic in 3 years, because that is it's kind of a defining paradigm for what you're looking for, right?
Right.
And I think for a lot of assets, it's a reasonable goal, provided you can move quickly. And I think there's an interesting conversation we'll have about how do you keep moving quickly. But what do you look at for that?
Yeah, I bet you the financing is a really difficult aspect of keeping the train moving. And then the second, I think, is operational talent.
Yeah.
People who have an execution to bias, have done it before, or if they haven't done it before, are rabid about doing it. On the academic side, to just tie that loop, if you have a hot new innovation, you want to get into nature, you want to get into science, and you're working your tail off night and day to be the first.
Yeah.
There's a method when you have done research to get that paper done and submitted, right? Like writing a manuscript, you start ahead of time, right? And you put all the finishing touches on it. You've softened up the reviewers ahead of time. You know the editor, all this kind of stuff. The same way, I think a competent operational executive does that. Like they understand you're going to have regulatory interactions. You have to plan those. You need experts around you that do this. You need project management that keeps you on track. And every day matters, right? And it's not an everyday matters to just any one stakeholder. It matters to the patients. It's easy to say, but it matters also to investors. That's also easy to say, but it should matter to you.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that part is what we look for in teams. I don't necessarily advocate, I like work-life balance. I'll put it that way. I think there's a thing down here in North Carolina. We get a lot of grief because we like to go home and see our families. And I think that's cool. I think we should encourage that kind of culture. Yeah. But at the same time, you can work hard and play hard. And I think play hard is about efficiency in work, if that makes sense. You can do things on a pace and a schedule. You can recognize you can't solve everything in a day, but you can recognize that if you delay that day over and over again, that does compound. And I think that's the risk if you haven't been in an industrial environment with project managers around you. You have to find that healthy tension between this actually needs more time and we can't afford to lose more time. So anyway, that's the bias on the team side we look for. And maybe just a couple other things because I missed them before. You have to solve huge opportunities. I saw a fierce article today. I was talking about the average revenue without GLP-1s included is like 370 million. So this is reality. But what is pharma doing? Pharma wants $1 billion drug.
Correct.
They have to have that. They want the next GLP-1, which is like $60 billion right now. So I think that's the other side.
Which is why they're gobbling up anything tangentially in that asset class right now, right?
Right. And
if you're either an alternative or you're a ride along, right? We're seeing tremendous interest in those
because we can't saturate that market yet either, right? And
correct.
But there's a little bit of the other side they've pointed out is you can't follow into everything that's super crowded. Like oncology is getting a lot of grief now because it's very hard to enroll and everyone's doing it. Yet I don't think we've cured cancer. I think there's a lot of cancers out there, and I think it's the biggest dollar expenditure still in pharma. So where I'm going with this is I think those are all valid opportunities. I think rare disease is a valid opportunity. I think what gets hard is, AMR, antimicrobial resistance, was something I did. It was really hard to do. And I think we got public backing, strategic backing, and private backing. And I think that's just emblematic of venture alone can't do those type of opportunities. It just doesn't fit the model. And so we're not trying to change that part of it, right? We understand that the system at the end demands certain things. And so when we talk to teams, it's got to be teams with an execution bias. They can work on platforms or assets. It's got to solve big problems because 10 years from now, it has to be relevant. 10 years from now, it has to be relevant. And those big problems have to reward investors because they entice pharma to put in the 100 million plus. I think the net is now 2.23 billion for one successful drug. So they have to have that incentive too. Right or wrong is not the debate today. That's what it is.
Correct. I mean, those are just the economic realities, right? That we have to be able to function under. And it's interesting you talk about operational teams because so often in these early, I'm going to say in the pre-seed and kind of the area that you're talking about investing in and just following, we see that especially academic teams really need support from a commercial operations lens that helps them speed up that pace of decision making, right? Because they're very used to an academic pace that doesn't fit from a commercial scale, right, or a commercial operating side, and that's some of what you talked about. And so that's where we see a lot of really beneficial engagement that isn't even that heavy-handed, right? Because sometimes it's also that you have maybe a couple of founders and there's just too much work to accomplish in a limited amount of time to keep schedule. So things are slipping. Not because people aren't working, they're working 10, 12 hour a day, 6-7 days a week. And there's just only so many hours in the day. And, shocker, if you're a startup founder, your number one job is to raise money so that you can continue to pay your people. And then your number two job is everything that follows suit, which is literally everything in the company is your responsibility. So, I'm curious, do you have kind of specific, in terms of opportunity or example that kind of exemplifies your thesis and where you guys have obviously success is going to look different whenever you're at an early stage and you're investing so early, right? You probably don't have some clear big win exits, but what has kind of looked like a win to you guys so far? Where have you seen success?
Right. So I would say, first we launched the fund in September.
Yep.
Since then, I think we've looked at about 120 opportunities that are in North Carolina already.
Okay.
Talked to about 60, done diligence to some extent on 20 or 30.
Okay.
Have put a couple term sheets out there, and we're close to the line. We have one that's crossing the line and two that are very close.
Okay.
And I think what they share, so first off is again, I kind of mentioned three of us are operators.
Yep.
And I will say, we're not trying to take over your company. I think we're looking for people that understand that there's a yin and the yang, like you have to work together.
Yeah.
And we don't want to do, I tell this to people all the time, like I'm the PhD on the team. I don't want to know the science more than you. I can't. You've forgotten more about it than I will ever know. What I want to do is help focus that into something that becomes a medicine.
Yeah.
All the things that we just talked about around operational prowess come from getting my butt kicked trying to do it.
Yeah. It's School of Hard Knocks, right?
Really
let me relay some of these wins over to you.
So you find some of the serial entrepreneur on the academic side are all too happy to be like, all right, if I can get a CEO, if I can convince them to come over and do it,
yes,
that'd be great.
Yes.
I want to have a hand on the science to accelerate it because I think I know it well.
Yeah.
And how to get this into a company.
And, hopefully they do, right? They're going to be probably the CSO in that kind of arrangement, right? And they better, it's their baby, right?
Yeah, Charlie Gersbach was fantastic in this role as acting CSO over at Tune. And I think, I would give him a lot of credit for helping guide those early days. I'm sure there's tons of talented people that were underneath it, but he didn't just say, good luck.
Yeah.
He helped. Yeah. And he also knew when it was time to step aside and bring on someone like Derek Jantz, who's now over there.
Yeah.
So I think, those are healthy relationships, and that's what we're striving for, but we have to get that track record. So to your original question, there's one group that's maybe going to be a little bit surprised as our sort of first financing. It's going to be a bit more in the med tech space. But we have specific domain expertise. We know all the players in it.
Okay.
We know the clinicians, in this case, the surgeons, the different providers. We know the distributors. It's a really unique opportunity to make this team more successful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and our capital goes a long way to doing that. So we can inject the right amount of money for them to pressure test at the pre-seed stage. Is this going to work?
Yeah.
And operate with this incredible innovator who I think wants to work with us, recognizes those are complementary strengths, and lets him do what he actually loves.
Yes.
So that's sort of
it's a big win-win. Yeah.
There's a second one we're looking at where we're going to be much more of a participation type check, but the ask is to plug more into the local side. So as this company grows, access to talent is huge, right?
Yeah.
And we're one of the weird groups that sits in the middle happily meeting everybody. We'll meet anybody for a cup of coffee. We'll share what we're thinking about, what we're excited about, what we want to know more about. And I think the idea is we put in so much free effort just to try and know people.
Yeah.
Because that's how good opportunities organically come up.
Absolutely.
Through inorganic networking in that sense.
Yep.
So I think, that's the value we're going to provide to that company. And then we have a third one along the way where we're trying to help pair the scientist and the experienced manager.
Yeah.
And we need to provide the early stage know-how so that bridges between their expertise. Mm-hmm. And that's not one unique case. There are several we're working on that. And I think that's a cool place to be and a terrifying place to be.
Yeah.
Meaning you got to win the trust of that innovator that you genuinely do care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You got to get the experienced manager to say, I want to take that risk.
Yeah.
And we've got to go out and raise the money. This is the funny part about where investors are at multiple stages of check, not just because we write small checks. Bigger checks do this too. It's not just, I'm going to lead and the syndicate's going to come. You have to find the syndicate. You actually cross the line as pseudo part of the management team raising the funds.
Yeah.
So I would say those three things hopefully exemplify. We want to operate. We want to help founders. We want to raise the money with them. We want to inject the initial capital, get that started. And we recognize that we are one model and we're not for everybody, and not everybody is for us. And frankly, therefore, we need more early stage capital here. We're just happy to be one of the ones getting it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly something that is tremendously needed here, right? And I love what you talked about the commitment to the ecosystem is how I would phrase it, right? And that's something that definitely, sits pretty seriously with us at Kymanox, and it's why we've got 3 folks here at Venture Connect today. And even
you guys are everywhere.
Sorry,
it's awesome. You guys are everywhere.
Yeah. We try, we really do, right? And our marketing is fantastic. But the commitment to the startup companies, even though they're not going to be the biggest source of revenue for us, right? But they're where we're going to see the innovation, right? And at our core, we genuinely believe, and we hold it as our moniker, that we do what we do because patients deserve better. And this innovation is what's going to ultimately drive that. Yeah, maybe big pharma's going to execute on it like we talked about earlier, but odds are the innovation's going to come through here, right? So, well, hey, this has been great. In closing, Dave, maybe share with folks, how can they connect with you guys? Where could they go to learn more, hear more, right? Wherever that might be.
Yeah, so I think, we're focusing on LinkedIn, I would say, as the way to kind of find us. It's allowing us, I think, to post some more data around what's happening in pre-seed, in biopharma generally, and in starting companies here in North Carolina. We're at Venture Connect, and Peter Walker from Carta is going to be here. I'm a junkie for his data, so you'll see me posting lots of stuff about that. I think that gives you an insight into what we're trying to do with CapeFear and what we're learning. Yeah, because again, we're learning, right? We're learning about what we need to do and what the ecosystem needs us to do. And then for me personally, connecting with me on there is a great way to go through that. I think, again, we invest in North Carolina companies. You have to already be operating here. Yeah. I would say that bias is very strongly towards therapeutics. Yep. We write a $500,000 check. We cannot write more than that. We are willing to do safes, notes, and priced equity rounds. Okay. And we want to partner, meaning we're not just a check and run. Yeah. So it's a relationship, and we're willing to build with everybody. Yeah. Excellent. Well, Dave, thanks so much for joining us on Life Science Solutions, and we'll look forward to chatting in the future. Cheers. That wraps up this episode of Life Science Solutions. A big thank you to Dave Ousterout for sharing his journey from CRISPR research to venture capital, and for shining a light on how CapeFear Biocapital is helping turn scientific breakthroughs into real-world treatments right here in North Carolina. To learn more about how Kymanox supports innovators in bringing life science products to market faster and more efficiently, visit Kymanox.com. This episode was edited and produced by Walk West. Until next time, I'm Chris Adkins, and this is Life Science Solutions, where challenges meet innovation.